So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, How to Talk About Elder Abuse. Oh, I got the wrong title on the top. It's about, so when elder abuse is suspected in hospitals, understanding the role and response of police services. So today we are joined by Constable Mark Reeser and Constable Nancy Wagner. We have some basic logistics that we're just going to go through before we begin the webinar. Everyone will be muted throughout the webinar, but you will have an opportunity at the sidebar where it says a question, a box that you can ask questions as we go along. And at the end, we will open that up and we'll unmute you and you can ask your questions as we go through it. We will hopefully have about 10 to 15 minutes at the end where Mark and Nancy can answer anything that comes up in the discussion or any other questions that you may have regarding their presentation. You will be prompted at the end of the webinar to complete a short evaluation questionnaire. We do appreciate your feedback because it does provide us the opportunity to plan future sessions and to meet the needs of our stakeholders in our community. The contact information will be provided at the end of the presentation for our speakers if you want to get in further contact with them. The session will also be recorded, so those who aren't able to join us today and or want to review the session again, it will be posted on our website a couple days after the webinar is posted along with the PowerPoint presentation. So without further ado, we have a quick polling question just to find out where our participants are from Ontario, because we did send out the webinar notice to all the GEM nurses across Ontario. And I know some people are on vacation now, and we did have a technical issue the last webinar. So I'm going to post the questionnaire to see if it comes up. And if you could just indicate where you're located. So there's the options of Central East, GTA West, East, and North. I'm not sure if everybody can see that or not. Okay. I think everyone's responded. So just so people know, the majority of our participants are coming from the Peterborough, Northumberland area, the GTA area, and we do have a couple people from the Sudbury and Thunder Bay area. So that's great to have the diversity of input from people across Ontario. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark, but before I do that, I just want to do a quick introduction of our speakers. So Mark began policing career in 2009 with the Peterborough Police Services, and in 2013, Mark was transferred to the Sexual Offences Unit of the Criminal Investigations Bureau, where he spent 2 years before transferring to the Major Crimes Unit, where he's currently working. During all of his time in the Criminal Investigations Bureau, Mark has been responsible for overseeing and investigating elder abuse cases. Mark has an undergraduate degree in kinesiology from Wilfrid Laurier and a Master's of Business Administration degree from the University of Fredericton. And next, we also have Provincial Constable Nancy Wagner. She's got 23 years of experience in policing. She started a career as a police dispatcher for Halton Region and then to Niagara Regional Police. After that, she spent 5 years in corrections at the Niagara Detention Centre. And for the last 3 years, she has been the mental health liaison officer at Northumberland OPP. And just recently, she has joined the mental health engagement and response team in partnership with Northumberland Hills Community Mental Health Team. And I know that she has had a lot of experience as well in terms of working with older adults in our community and involved with, and both individuals are on our local elder abuse networks as well. So they have a good understanding of the issues. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mark to start the webinar.
Thanks very much. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with everybody today, and hopefully you'll find some of the information that I share with you useful and relevant. And if you have questions, I'd be happy to do my best to answer them at the end. So I'm going to talk about a few things. So these are just the topics I'm going to cover. So legislation and laws pertaining to elder abuse, information sharing and reporting elder abuse to the police, who to report suspected elder abuse to, strategies to engage patients and opening up their willingness, hopefully, to speak with police, and then the importance of collaboration when responding to seniors at risk or experiencing elder abuse. And hopefully we'll have time to share a case study that both Nancy and myself worked on several months ago. Sorry, I'm flipping too quick. So just in relation to legislation and laws pertaining to elder abuse, I'm going to cover off the following things quickly. What does the criminal code say about elder abuse? How and when will police become involved? And what other acts direct healthcare providers in relation to reporting suspected elder abuse? So the next polling question here is this. So in the Criminal Code of Canada, what section defines elder abuse and outlines the offense? So I don't expect you to know the criminal code, but if you could just take a guess at the answer to that, that would be fantastic. We'll just post that question here. Looks like we may be having difficult posting the questions, which is fine. So we'll just keep moving. Okay, so I'll let you take your best guess, but anyways, the answer is that the criminal code does not have a section on elder abuse, and elder abuse is actually not defined within the Criminal Code of Canada. So some people may have already known that, and other people find that very surprising. So police investigations are guided by offenses as defined in the Criminal Code or other federal or provincial or territorial statutes. So the Criminal Code dictates most of what we would do in elder abuse cases. Other statutes that I would be referring to would be the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, the Youth Criminal Justice Act. So elder abuse, verbal abuse, and emotional abuse are not charges, they're not specific to the criminal code and are not outlined in the criminal code. And so what that means is that often when we're dealing with people in other supportive roles, they would be using words and terms like elder abuse, verbal abuse, and emotional abuse. But as a police officer, although we understand these terms, these are not charges that we're able to lay or able to investigate. So sometimes it just means that there's a little bit of education that's required in order for the terminologies used by different services to be understood. So obviously, as you're aware, elder abuse can take on many different forms, some of those being physical, sexual, emotional, verbal, financial abuse, or neglect. And this chart just outlines some of the charges in the criminal code, and I'm not going to go through all of them, that would be applicable under each of those circumstances. So although emotional abuse is not outlined in the criminal code, there are charges there that might be applicable based on the circumstances, and same with verbal abuse. Although the criminal code doesn't define verbal abuse, there are a number of charges there that based on the circumstances may be applicable given the situation. And so like I just said, some of the charges may be applicable even if they're not defined in the criminal code. However, the criminal code does have a section, which I've outlined at the bottom here, that says that when somebody is sentenced, factors such as the age of the victim, their vulnerability, and their dependence on others can be a factor that influences sentencing and may in fact be used to increase the sentence that somebody is facing because of that person's vulnerability or age. Moving forward into policy that is not directly related to police, and you may be very aware of this already, but the Long-Term Care Act states that every licensee of a long-term care home shall ensure the appropriate police service or police force is immediately notified of any alleged or suspected or witnessed incidents of abuse or neglect of a resident that the licensee suspects may constitute a criminal offense. And the Retirement Home Regulatory Authority has almost an identical piece of legislation. So again, retirement homes are obligated to notify police of any suspected, witnessed, or alleged neglect or abuse that's been taken place or that's been witnessed by somebody that's in their care. So these are legislations that definitely create the need and the necessity for people offering care to seniors to be in contact with police and reporting incidents that have either occurred or alleged or may have taken place. So I'm going to go to the next question here, and I don't know if it's going to work or not. So I'll just read it out, and I'm not going to ask you to respond. But the next question is, what is the most common type of elder abuse reported to the Peterborough Police Service? And again, I can only speak for Peterborough. I can't speak for other services, but I'll get you to just take a guess on your own at this, and we'll flip to the next slide here. So most commonly what we're seeing in Peterborough is resident-to-resident minor assaults in long-term care homes or retirement homes where one or both of the individuals have dementia. And so the previous legislation that I just showed in relation to the Long-Term Care Home Act and the Retirement Home Act has really forced retirement homes and long-term care homes to be reporting incidents to police. Most of the incidents that I'm seeing in Peterborough are very minor assaults where one resident with dementia pushes or strikes another resident. And in the vast majority of these cases, the residents don't remember the incident moments or minutes after it happened. And it's very rare that we would be following up or interviewing these people, as it would likely do more harm than good. And the courts also don't want us to be flooding the system with a number of seniors who are committing minor assaults and don't have the mental understanding that what they had done wasn't appropriate. And then secondly, we're seeing a lot of frauds and scams, and I would guess it's probably the same across the province that are targeting seniors. But often we're seeing victims, that are in their 20s and 30s all the way up into their 80s, 90s. So that would be the second most common thing that we're seeing. And then lastly, we would be seeing family disputes often over finances. So we get a lot of that where family members are in dispute with each other, looking to either control or get their hands on the money of one of their parents. I believe the last question that I was going to ask, and again, I know we can't respond, but I'll just read it out. Often there are challenges relating to patient privacy and information sharing between different agencies, including hospitals and police services. So I was just curious, and I guess I won't get the answer to this, but I was curious as to what stands in the way of open file sharing between your workplace and the police. So I don't know if there's a spot there where you're able to type that in. If you can just kind of, under the question, if you can just respond with an A, B, C, or D, just out of interest, I would be curious to see what your thoughts are on what would be the biggest roadblock. I'll just give you a minute if you don't mind responding. If you just type it in the question box. Okay, so I'm seeing a few people responding with internal policy and procedures. I'm also seeing some responses for fear of legal repercussion. And I think those are very valid concerns. And I think that's probably similar to what we would be seeing locally as well. Um, I wanted to just make you aware of some legislation that's been in place for quite a while. So the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act actually permits file sharing under certain circumstances. So this section here, 32, states the following: an institution shall not disclose personal information in its custody or under its control except if disclosure is to an institution or a law enforcement agency in Canada to aid an investigation undertaken with a view to a law enforcement proceeding or from which a law enforcement proceeding is likely to result. So this legislation allows file sharing to the police, and all that's required is that there's a belief that a proceeding is likely to result. You don't have to know that for sure, but you have to say, based on this information that I have, I think it's likely that some type of investigation or some type of uh, uh, investigation or follow-up will be the result of me sharing this information. So it's just something to keep in mind, that this legislation is out there and it's for that purpose, so that information can be shared ultimately to protect and the people in our community that are vulnerable, and to ensure that the police have the information that they need in order to follow up and act on things that haven't been handled properly. I'm going to talk briefly about challenges that we face as a police service when we're investigating crimes against seniors. So often we find that seniors are reluctant to report criminal offenses to the police because they're scared of losing their independence, or they're fearful of being judged by their family members. And I think that's very, very common. It's definitely something that I've come across numerous times. We also will find that families often report incidents on behalf of a senior, but that the senior themselves does not want any type of police involvement, and that makes it challenging for us as well. And then thirdly, the CSI effect. So I'm sure most people are quite aware of the show CSI. It's a fantastic show, but I hope you wouldn't be too, I hope I wouldn't wreck your day if I told you that it wasn't necessarily completely accurate, and that we don't have the ability to wrap up all of our investigations within a 60-minute window. And so often people think that police have authorities or abilities that we simply don't have. And so that's another challenge that we face, is families will say, I need you to investigate this, and their expectations of us just might not be realistic. Seniors' rights. So unless deemed not to have capacity by either a physician or an accredited capacity assessor, seniors have the same rights and expectation of privacy as everybody else in society. And so if a senior has capacity and family's concerned about the way that they're spending their money or doesn't agree with it, ultimately as police, we don't have the authority to do anything about that, to either step in and investigate, or to suggest that they would spend their money otherwise. I've dealt with numerous cases where seniors are spending their money on things that I or other people and family members think is a complete waste of their money. However, they still have capacity, and they're making an educated and informed decision, and that's what they're choosing to spend their money on. And then the last piece here is that the privacy of information relating to seniors is only usable by us if it's obtained legally. So if somebody brings us a whole bunch of bank records and says, my mom or my dad is spending all this money, I don't like the way that it's being spent, if that senior still has capacity, we're not able to use that information because it hasn't been obtained by us either through consent of that senior, through the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, or by us having the grounds and the ability to write a warrant and to gain that information that way. I'm going to move on to who should you report suspected elder abuse to? So the short answer is your local police service or the police service who covers the area where this suspected elder abuse occurred. So in Ontario, as you're probably aware, police services operate within a jurisdiction, and it's their duty to investigate crimes and incidents that occur within their jurisdiction. So if somebody shows up at your hospital and you believe that they're a victim of elder abuse, if you know where that occurred, you would report that to the police service that polices the area of where that incident occurred. If you're not sure where it occurred, then you could certainly report it to the police service that polices the jurisdiction of where your hospital is located. And then some crimes occur in more than one jurisdiction. And so in some cases, it's going to be several police services that have to collaborate in order to investigate the incident properly and thoroughly. Some police services have specialized units where officers specialize in elder abuse and crimes against seniors. So if you aren't aware, you could simply call your local police service and ask, do you have an elder abuse investigator or do you have a crimes against seniors unit? And if so, who are those officers and what's their contact information? So that might be a great starting point to find out, might be a great person to reach out to initially. And then there's numerous agencies around the province, such as the Law Enforcement Agencies Protecting Seniors. So that's a group of law enforcement agencies across Ontario that collaborate and network in order to share information and more effectively investigate crimes against seniors. I'm just going to talk quickly about strategies in engaging patients to speak with the police. So again, I think the best approach is to use common sense and be honest. I don't need to tell you that. You probably already know that. One thing I would stress is if you're going to report something or you're going to give information to the patient about the police's role, I would recommend that you talk with your local police service before approaching the senior and giving them information on what police involvement might look like. And so that you don't tell the patient one thing, and then when the police show up, they say, no, we can't actually do that, and it looks very different. So a quick phone call to say, here's what I've got, what would a police response look like? May make sure that they're getting the most accurate information right at the start. And then I think it's important for people to know that just because there is police involvement, it doesn't mean that there's going to be a criminal investigation initiated. So often people just want advice from police. They want police to be at the table of people that are looking for solutions. And we're happy to do that. And it doesn't mean that we're going to launch into some big investigation. We would obviously be checking with the senior or with their powers of attorney or substitute decision makers prior to launching an investigation. And one of the last points here is that often just the presence of the police will have a positive impact on a situation. So sometimes just people knowing that police are involved is enough for somebody who is committing an offense or acting in a way that they shouldn't be. Often that's enough for them to say, oh man, I better watch it because the police are involved. Obviously, I think it's really important to express concern and for the person's well-being and desire to see their situation improve. And I've had some really good luck with people that didn't want to talk. And when you break it down and say that my real concern here is your well-being and to see your situation get better, they seem to open up when they recognize that my goal isn't just to push my investigation forward. And I think that's something that as healthcare providers, you're probably a lot better at than we are as police, because that's the essence of your job, is to provide care and ensure that people's situation is improved and that they're cared for. Another strategy is often seniors who are being abused or mistreated by family members are reluctant to become involved because they rely on family members for care, and they don't want to get their family members in trouble or arrested. and they feel like that may cut them off as their caregivers are no longer able to have contact with them. So again, it comes down to that conversation that, you know, terrible care or abuse isn't really care, and it's not really putting them in a situation where things are going to improve. And it's, again, it comes back to expressing genuine concern for the well-being. And then the last point here is some people, you know, maybe a little put off by a uniform officer showing up to chat with them, especially in a hospital setting. So inquire about whether it would be okay for police to come and chat with them, and inquire about whether or not they would be comfortable with somebody in uniform coming to speak with them. In many cases, I get asked if I'm going to be coming in a police car and if I'm going to be wearing a uniform. And I have the benefit in my role of not wearing a uniform and not arriving in a police car, which sometimes puts people a little bit more at ease. Then the last point I wanted to talk about before I turn it over to Nancy is just the importance of collaboration. So obviously, as police, we're limited in the services that we can offer. And as I said at the very beginning, essentially we're operating based on the crimes that are outlined in the criminal code. And often abuse is so complex that it requires a much more well-rounded approach than just police involvement. And so from a policing standpoint, we love the ability to collaborate with other agencies, including staff at hospitals and outpatient agencies, in order to provide more well-rounded care in order to elders or seniors that may be in an abusive situation. And so as police, we're just a very small part of a team that's required to effectively support victims of elder abuse. At the end, if we have time, I think we'll just talk a little bit about a case study, but I don't want to eat into any more time here, so I'm going to hand things over to Nancy.
Nancy, do you want to start?
Yep. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mark. That was really informative, and I'm actually glad you ended on the collaboration part, because I got to admit that's my favorite part. As Rhian said, I work for Northumberland OPP, and about 3 years ago, the OPP released their mental health strategy. The part I loved about it was that they released it with no guidelines or strings attached. You were able to sort of look at your local community and make it what you wanted. So it was perfect for me, because I had already had some great ideas with what I wanted to do. So of course, the first one was we wanted to support our members, and then supporting our communities. And that was just changing the way that we interact with people with mental health issues and vulnerable people. So we wanted to do that through a couple different things. Education and awareness is always key. The way we apprehended people, whether it was seniors with dementia or people with mental illness, we wanted to look at the suicide intervention and prevention, risk mitigation, which you're going to see later on is going to talk about our situation table, and other things, and our CMEU, which is our community mobilization engagement unit, which was developed out of this mental health strategy. Collaboration with agencies that Mark talked about, that's been huge for me. That's what I've been working on for the last couple of years, because it is really honestly the most important thing here. And partnerships and initiatives. So if we could just move on. So we wanted to, the Community Mobilization Engagement Unit, we wanted to make that commitment to sustain and build healthy communities by working collaboratively. You're going to hear later on about our situation table, how many cases we have, because we've been at this now with the situation table for 3 years. Our new MHEART program, which is our mental health engagement and response team. We're very fortunate here. We were designated as safe communities, and what does that mean? We have 52 partners that sit around our safe communities, and we bring different events for free for education and different initiatives to the community. We are rolling out our crisis intervention training, which is going to run a couple times this year, which is a 3-day certificate course run by myself and Jen Cox from Community Mental Health. We also have a vulnerable a person registry, which we have over 60 registrants on that, which I'll talk about. We also rolled out a mental health pre-charge diversion. So we've always had the youth rebound diversion, but now we have a mental health pre-charge diversion for adults 16 and up. We had developed a lot of referral forms, and I'll talk about those. We have our brief mental health screener, which the officers use to help determine, mental illness as opposed to drinking and other addictions, which helps with apprehensions and going to the hospital. And we also developed some MOUs and transfer of care policies with the hospitals, which I couldn't believe actually that I'd been here that long and we hadn't had any of those things. So our OPP mental health strategy, like I said, it was we wanted to collect some data from our brief mental health screeners, how many seniors that we were going to see as opposed to other people with addictions and mental health. We've talked about some of the other things, the CIT training. But first, I really, when I was looking at the strategy, we have quite a detachment area here, which is kind of diverse. We have 3 different hospitals that we use here in Northumberland OPP. We have 3 different police services. So we have Port Hope Police, Cobourg Police, and Northumberland, which makes it challenging. And we also cross over into 2 different LHINs, which for our Brighton area people make it very difficult. We can just move on from that one. So if you just move to the next slide, the brief mental health screeners, I think Peterborough's using them. I think we're all using them now. If you could just, and it was just mainly to track data. And we use it with all mental health occurrences, whether it's for seniors or other people with mental health. And it's disclosed with our criminal briefs, and it's used as a referral form. If officers attend a residence, whether it's with a senior or somebody with mental health, and there's no apprehension, then on the back of the brief mental health screeners, they can connect people with services with their consent. It's compatible with other InterRI forms, which I know are popular through hospital systems. So we can go to the next one, the crisis intervention training. I'm a big believer if we're going to work together. It's all part of that collaboration that we really should train together. I've been pushing for that. They've done crisis intervention training for a long time. I know I sat on a crisis intervention training course with a room full of officers, and I just don't think it was very effective. So our crisis intervention training will be different people from hospital, police, security, the courts, just to get a real diverse group of people to talk about the real issues going on. It's going to cross into mental illness, the Ontario Mental Health Act, the justice system, dementia, anxiety disorders, and all those things. But it's really going to focus on the de-escalation techniques, which I think we all need to learn a lot better. So our situation table. I love the situation table. I think it was the start of a lot of great things that happened here in this area. We don't have a Form 1 facility, so we needed to get creative. We meet every Tuesday at Cobourg Detachment. I think we have over 135 cases. And it's a filter system that we work through, and the Privacy Commission allowed us to share information when something's at an imminent risk, just to mitigate that risk. So when I talk about cases that we've brought to the table, we've had quite a few seniors that we have brought to the table, and we're fortunate enough to have a representative from the Central East LHIN that sits at our table. So it's a great way to share information protected under the situation table. You all have to agree that the case is imminent risk to take it further and disclose personal information. And it goes back to that collaboration, so that multi-agency proactive approach to connecting individuals in need with services and mitigating risks. We want people to enter into the right door service. We want to get people connected to services and not end up in emerge, end up in the hospital, or end up in our court system. Let me just see. So one thing I found about doing door knocks for situation tables at seniors, we've taken actually a sort of a different approach. We'll take the OSPCA with us, especially if there's pets involved with seniors, because seniors love their pets. So it's a great way for us to get in the door with seniors. They take dog food for their pets. They do all that kind of stuff. So we've had some great success with our seniors from doing door knocks. So our referral forms, one of the big ones for me was this vulnerable person registry, and it's volunteer. It's not just for seniors or for, it's for seniors, people with mental health, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I have a daughter who has a developmental and intellectual disability, and she's on that registry. And it has a picture of the person, and it has triggers, risks that might be involved, ways to calm the person if we attend the residence. And it's been very effective. We had a senior here in Northumberland County that because of the registry, we were able to locate them without putting the helicopter up and some other resources. So the volunteer, I think we have over 60 people registered on that now. I've also spoken to the hospital quite a few times with seniors that they're going to be releasing and encourage them to put them on the vulnerable person registry. Mark talked about long-term care facilities. The one thing we're seeing is an increase in reporting and an increase in staff on resident assaults. So the one thing I developed, and it's been going for a couple of years now, and it's been probably one of the most effective things, was an occurrence template. So we use it for our community living because we have a large population of vulnerable people in community living, and we have quite a few long-term care facilities. So they do direct reporting to me through this occurrence template. So I've been able to monitor the incidents and make sure they've been reported to the ministry, monitor the incidents, and if there's anything that comes along as a frequent flyer, myself and now our mental health nurse will attend and do some safety planning or other planning with the long-term care facility to make it successful. So because of a lot of the staff on resident reporting assaults now or verbal abuse, we actually have been doing some presentations or there, and we've brought victim services and a local social worker to do some caregiving programs at the long-term care facilities to help the caregivers with the stress. The other thing we've done is developed a high-risk profile for group homes, but that's and some other lost and missing person forms for that we also use for long-term care facility for the people that get to go into the community. So if we could just move on there, that's what the Northumberland Vulnerable Person Registry looks like. It's about 6 pages long. And that's obviously just the first page, but it's a great registry. It goes right on our niche reporting system, and so when a call for service happens with one of those individuals, it's automatically flagged, and we can see all the details involved with that person. And it's used in emergency situations only. So here in Northumberland, we've developed some great partnerships. I talked about safe communities. And I guess that slide's not going to go. That's great. So safe communities, we have 3 subcommittees, slips and falls, interpersonal violence, and on-road, off-road safety committees. And you'll see there's some flyers further along in the presentation, and I'll show you some of the events that we've put on, one of them for seniors in particular. We also have some other committees that you can see there, our Human Service Justice and our partnerships with Campbellford Mental Health for the pre-charge mental health diversion. Our long-term care facility partnerships are fantastic, I think. And like I said, we have a huge community living population that we work really hard with. So you can just go on to the next slide there for safe communities. If you can just skip to the next one even, that would be great. Can show some of the events that have been put on. Perfect. So we had a huge expo in 2016. You can see we had Sheldon Kennedy and Clara Hughes because we were doing some great things with safe communities, but we wanted to bring the community to this event to try to fill in some of the gaps for services. So we had breakout sessions on seniors, mental health, addictions. It was a 2-day event, which was fantastic. And then from that, we started this Bridging the Gap series. And one of the things we did was we had a seniors Bridging the Gaps. We had a local lawyer come in and talk about power of attorney. And then we did a series on developmental services. Ones that you don't see here, we did ones on PTSD for frontline workers. And we're going to be doing another series on that as well this year. And then our big one this year is our Youth Expo that we're having at Northumberland Mall. So we've taken over the whole mall, and we're going to be bringing youth as well as the community back to Northumberland with some great keynote speakers. So you can move on from there. I've already talked about the adult pre-charge diversion. So I know this has been used once for a senior who continued to reoffend. And like Mark said, we don't like to put them through our court system. So the mental health diversion was a great way to mandate him to get some services, and it was quite effective, actually. And my favorite one, which we work really hard to get to, is the mental health engagement and response team. So I now work full-time with mostly with a mental health nurse. He's a psychiatric nurse that had transferred here to Northumberland Community Mental Health. I get pretty much 4 days with him, and then the other spot is filled in with case managers. So we have 2 case managers from Northumberland Community Mental Health. It was to get people to the right door service. Matt and I, which is the nurse, we just went out today to see a senior, connected him with services. Matt got some consent signed to speak to his family doctor and look at his meds, and then we'll go from there to hopefully reduce the visits to emergency departments and calls to police, because we all know that when people are in crisis, they either call the police or they go to emerge. We also wanted to improve the response for police involvement with individuals. So I can tell you that it's been about 2 months that we've been going at this MHEART. And honestly, I've worked so much overtime in the last 2 months because it just seems to be so effective, and we want to reach everyone. So we also wanted to reduce involvement with people in the legal system and incarceration. Again, like Mark said, we don't want people going to court, whether they're a senior or they have mental health or other vulnerabilities. Again, I go back to that right door service. Getting people connected to the proper services are what we want to do. I think in 8 weeks, I think the statistics were 106 individuals served and 180 visits we've made to different homes. Of course, the money came from the Central East LHINs, so we had to provide a lot of stats. So I had been collecting stats for a while through the work that I've been doing or through our situation table, and that's where we got the funding. And I know we got them on camera saying that they would give us more money if we could show our stats were up. So I think that's not going to be a problem. Again, it's mobile supports. We go out. We actually see a senior tomorrow in the community. And I think it's a really great proactive approach to reducing some of the risks. Again, we don't want to handle people in crisis. We know that's never a good time, so this is helpful. I think that's it for me. I don't know if we have time for the case study, Mark.
I'll just see if we have any questions, and if we do, then we'll answer those. And if not, then we can do a really quick overview of the case study if it's of interest. Okay. So if anybody does have a question right now, if you want to just type that quickly in the question box, and either Nancy or myself will do our best to respond. And if not, then we'll just spend 3 or 4 minutes just sharing a case that both Nancy and I worked on that was interesting and had some twists and turns that we didn't expect. All right, I'm not seeing anything right now, so maybe what we'll do is we'll just talk about this case quickly, and then if somebody does have a question and you want to type it into the question box, then I'm sure we'll have some time at the end to respond to it. So I'll start out, Nancy, and then please feel free to jump in if there's something that I've either forgotten or understated or misstated. So we had a case that was actually brought to my attention by the staff at the Peterborough Regional Health Center. And so just the overview here, the parties that were involved were a couple that were both in hospital, their son and his fiance. the hospital staff at Peterborough Regional Health Centre, including some of the in-house social workers, obviously the Ontario Provincial Police, victim services workers that were part of the Ontario Provincial Police's team, the Peterborough Police Service, and then there was numerous community agencies that were all coordinated through Peterborough Regional Health Centre in order to talk about supports being put in place for this couple upon their release from hospital. So those are the players that were involved. So I'll just do a brief overview. So an elderly couple that lived just outside of Peterborough in a town that's policed by the Ontario Provincial Police was admitted to Peterborough Regional Health Centre for some medical care. The couple's son decided that he would move into his parents' place while they were in the hospital under the pretenses that he was going to fix up and renovate their house to make it more accessible for his parents when they were eventually discharged from the hospital. The son also moved his fiance and kids into the house with him. When the parents were ready for discharge from the hospital, their son told them that the house was still under renovation, and he convinced his fragile parents to move into his apartment in Peterborough. His apartment was a second-story unit with 13 stairs to climb in order to access the apartment, and was also frequented by known drug users and addicts within the Peterborough area. Probably not surprising that it wasn't long before both parents were readmitted to hospital. Prior to their second release from hospital, so the parents were both at the point, or at least one of them was, where they were going to be released again. They indicated that they wanted to return to their house that their son was supposedly fixing up for them. And their son was refusing and trying to convince his parents that they should return to his apartment until the home renovations were completed. So this got the attention of, I believe, initially the social workers that were working with this couple. And then they brought in a number of different resources and agencies that I've listed here to sit down and talk with the involved parties about strategies to transition this couple back to their house with the appropriate supports. So during this meeting, the couple's son was involved, and he came up with numerous excuses as to why he should continue living in his parents' house and they should move back into his inaccessible and drug-addicted frequented apartment. His excuses included that he turned all the gas bills and phone bills and other utilities over into his own name or his fiance's name. He said that his kids had started the school semester and it wasn't practical in order to move them in the middle of the semester. It became very clear that he was just coming up with any excuse he could to try and stay in his parents' house and have them return to his apartment. Numerous community supports were put in place. Eventually, the son was essentially told that he needed to get out. He had no legal rights to being in that house. You know, that was something that initially that was going to be followed up by the Ontario Provincial Police because the residence was within their jurisdiction. What made this one interesting was that the son called his fiance during this meeting. She interrupted the meeting, was yelling and screaming. She was advised that, you know, her actions weren't appropriate. She needed to calm down and that we would speak with her in a calm manner, but that didn't seem to work. So Nancy and myself, without having any luck convincing her to calm down or leave the hospital, assisted her in leaving the hospital. It turned into a bit of a struggle, and at one point she stated that she was going to burn down the couple's house, which actually turned out to be fantastic for us because it gave us the ability to arrest her criminally and put her on conditions not to go back to that house or not to be at that house. So It wasn't the, I guess, the way that we expected things to unfold, but the outcome of it actually worked out in a way that we were able to come up with a plan through some strange methods to have his son and his fiance and their kids move out of the house. So anyways, that's kind of the Coles notes of it, but there was a huge team of people involved in meetings and collaborating on making sure that this couple, when they moved home, would have the appropriate supports in place. And you know, that simple things like shoveling snow as just took place in the winter, or accessing groceries, or you know, medication or anything like that would be done, and nothing would fall through the cracks. So this is one example of many different examples, but where the collaboration was entirely required and needed in order to give this couple the best possibility of returning to their house. Nancy, if you want to jump in, if there's something I've missed or things you want to focus on.
And I think the importance is the collaboration of all of the different agencies. So, you know, the hospital just wasn't having a case conference with hospital people about this couple because, you know, it ended up being that police needed to be there. And like Mark said, we ended up arresting the female and removing her, and that's where things got sorted out. But like we always tend to want to have those meetings within our own silos. When you open it up and involve everyone, I think it was just so effective, and because it crossed our jurisdictions, you know, with Mark there being the detective that he is, and then, you know, our prevention stuff that we've been doing here in Northumberland and bringing victim services, I think that's what made it successful. Like Mark said, she decided what the outcome was going to be, but either way, it was going to be the same outcome. She just took us down a different route. But I think, you know, collaborating and sharing of information, I know that agencies are restricted with that, but I think these discharge planning meetings with all of us are so important, because I think police have a lot of information that maybe the hospitals aren't aware of when discharging, and I've seen that through a couple different meetings that I've attended at the hospital. I think that's about it for me.
Sure. There's a couple questions. So we're going to unmute you, Karen, if you want to ask. It looks like you have a question. Is that correct? Karen, I don't know. I can't hear you. Are you able to, do you have a question that you wanted to ask? Oh, maybe not. Okay. And then there's one typed out here. So it says, do we require consent to report potential or suspected elder abuse? If a senior doesn't want a situation reported, are we still able to report it? I'll attempt to answer this, and then Nancy, I'd be happy for you to share your thoughts as well. My short answer is yes. I mean, if you have concern for somebody, you're absolutely able to report it. And you know, the senior may not want police to launch an investigation, but it doesn't mean that we can't still check into the situation, even if that's not what the person wants. I think we just have to be careful not to, we want the person to still have open communication channels so that we can assist them. But yeah, you don't have to have somebody's permission in order to report something. Nancy, is there something else or more you want to add?
And I always say if it was a child, you know, we wouldn't think twice about it. That's the same way I feel about the seniors. And I'm sure Mark will agree that there's things that we can do that we don't have to right at that moment talk to the senior. There's things that we can do behind the scenes that might shed some more light on things. And we always have ways around maybe not involving the person right away, but that we can look into and see maybe if there's another open door that we can resolve things. Would you agree with that, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. We'd rather look into something and find that there's nothing there than find out after the fact that there was something there and nobody said anything or nothing was done. I don't think there's any other questions at this time. So
I think
Yeah.
I'm just going to speak for us, Mark, and I'm sure it's the same across the province. I think we're trying to put a lot of strategies in place for prevention, education, those kind of things. I know that we're really focused on that, and that's why I talked about some of the initiatives that we have going on, because we don't want it to get to these points. Would you agree with that, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. In any aspect of policing, but especially with
Yep,
vulnerable population.
definitely. Yes.
We'd rather be proactive than reactive, and we don't always have that luxury, but when we do, it's our preferred approach. It looks like there is another question. So what about privacy concerns if from the hospital? And so I guess that would be, what if, the way I take that is, what if the hospital doesn't allow staff to share information? I guess that would be, essentially, that would be a great conversation for some of the senior admin at the hospital that would have put those policies in place to have with their legal department, and also to have with their local police service. The legislation that I talked about earlier, definitely covers off and gives people permission to share information under the circumstances that I outlined. So the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, Section 32, subsection G, says that basically, if they believe that enforcement is likely to proceed or result from that. So it's not a very high threshold, and ultimately the information is being shared out of caution and out of a concern for somebody's well-being. So again, I'm not telling you to share documents without the permission of the hospital you work for, but that's why that legislation is there, so that information that is valuable to police can be shared with them. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just remember, you can always reach out to Mark or I or whoever's in your area and talk about somebody in a de-identified way. You don't have to identify them, but you can say, this is the case I have. What can I do about it? And maybe we can always, help with that, or see if we can offer you some information that might be helpful in a way to get around some of the privacy stuff. You don't have to tell us who they are. Just tell us what the scenario is, and maybe we can work around that.
And then it looks like, so does Section 32 apply with this type of reporting? Can you just flip back up to before that? Okay. Yeah, so I think that's probably the best answer is I believe Section 32 does apply, but obviously I can't give you permission to step outside of the policy that your hospitals have put in place. I recognize that we're 1 minute away from 2 o'clock, so maybe we'll put our contact information up on the slides here, and if people want to jot down our contact information, we'd be happy to correspond or to chat further. So we'll just give you mine for a minute, and then we'll flip to Nancy's in just a minute. And I wanted to thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us, and hopefully at least one or two things that we've shared have been of benefit and of use. Oh, there we go. There's both of them there.
So I would just like to thank both Nancy and Mark for taking the time today to join us and share their experiences with us on the issues of policing and just the response of assisting seniors in the hospital sector. If you wouldn't mind taking time to complete the evaluation form that pops up into your email after the session, we greatly appreciate that. Any comments or additional topics that you'd like to see us address, maybe more specific issues around the issue around policing and working with hospital sector, we've been more than happy to address that issue. So again, thank you so much for both of our speakers, and we appreciate your time participating today. And the recording, as I say, will be posted on our website within the next couple days, and I will you'll be able to get that on our website under the training and webinars. So thank you very much and have a good day.